My dad raised his champagne glass at my promotion dinner and said, "Some people are just born lucky, unlike the rest of us who actually work hard." I raised my water glass back and said, "Let's test that theory." The next morning, I withdrew every penny of financial support I'd been secretly providing my family for 6 years. No explanation, no warning, just stopped. They thought my success came from luck while I'd been paying their mortgage, car insurance, and credit card minimums since I was 24. Dad liked telling everyone at church how his youngest daughter just fell into money while he built his business from nothing. What he didn't mention was that his business had been hemorrhaging cash for 8 years, and I'd been keeping it afloat with monthly wire transfers. He thought came from a deceased uncle's trust fund I'd invented to protect his pride. First week after I stopped, nothing happened. They were still coasting on the last payment. Week 2, Dad called asking if the trust payment was late. I told him the trust had been dissolved due to market conditions. He laughed and said real workers don't rely on handouts anyway. Week 3, the mortgage company called. Dad discovered they were 3 payments behind because he'd been using my money for the mortgage while spending his business income on a boat he was restoring. He had 72 hours to pay $8,400 or face foreclosure proceedings. He sold his prized guitar collection for $3,000 and had to beg his brother for the rest. The brother he'd been telling for years that he was the successful one month too. Mom's car got towed from the grocery store parking lot. Turns out I'd been paying the insurance and registration for 4 years through an automatic payment she never knew about. She stood there with melting ice cream, calling Dad, who couldn't come get her because his truck had also been flagged for expired registration. They had to pay $1,800 in back fees and penalties plus $400 for the tow. Mom posted on Facebook asking for recipes to feed a family on $50 a week, the same woman who used to brag about only shopping at Whole Foods. My sister Kelly called me crying after her credit card got declined at her daughter's dance recital costume fitting. She'd maxed out everything because I'd been paying her minimums for 3 years, letting her live like she had infinite credit. The other dance moms watched her try 6 different cards while her daughter stood there in a half-pin tutu. Kelly ended up having to pull Madison from dance entirely because she couldn't afford the $200 monthly fees I'd been covering through a scholarship fund that was actually just me. Dad's business officially folded in month 3. Without my monthly injections of capital disguised as customer purchases, he couldn't make payroll. His 3 employees, guys he'd known for 15 years, walked out when their checks bounced. He tried to blame the economy, tried to blame his suppliers, tried to blame everyone except himself for never actually learning to read a profit and loss statement. He'd been playing successful businessman for almost a decade on my dime while telling everyone his daughter just got lucky with some tech job she didn't deserve. The boat he'd been restoring with what he thought was profit? Repossessed. Mom started cleaning houses, the woman who used to tell her book club she was too busy with charity work to have a job. She scrubbed toilets for the same neighbors she used to have over for wine tastings. One of them asked her what happened to the monthly charity galas she used to organize. Mom just mumbled something about priorities changing. My brother Tom moved back in with them at age 35 because he couldn't afford his apartment without the rent assistance I'd been providing. He thought his landlord had been giving him a deal because he was such a good tenant. Turned out I'd been paying the difference for 2 years so he could live in a place that matched his ego. Now he was sleeping on a blow-up mattress in Dad's former office, applying for jobs he'd previously said were beneath him. 6 months in, Dad finally figured it out. He went through old bank statements and traced the trust payments to an account I'd closed. He drove 4 hours to my new city, showed up at my office building, and waited in the lobby for 6 hours until security made him leave. He came back the next day. When I finally agreed to see him, he looked like he'd aged 10 years. His hands were shaking. The man who'd called me lucky at my own celebration dinner was now begging me to save his house. They were 5 months behind on the mortgage. Mom was having panic attacks. Kelly's husband was threatening divorce because of the debt. Tom was drinking himself to sleep every night on that blow-up mattress. I listened to him explain how they were drowning, how they couldn't understand how everything fell apart so fast. Then I pulled out my phone and showed him 6 years of bank transfers. $247,000 total. His face went white when he saw the numbers. I watched his face drain of color as he stared at my phone screen, his eyes moving down the list of transfers. His hands started shaking so badly that he had to grab the armrest of the lobby chair. He sank into it slowly, like his legs just gave out. This man who stood tall at church every Sunday, who shook hands with everyone and laughed loud, looked small now. His shoulders curved forward. His chin dropped toward his chest. Security stood across the lobby near the elevator bank, and I saw one of them take a step toward us. The other one touched his arm and shook his head. They were watching, though, making sure this didn't turn into something they'd need to handle. Dad kept staring at the phone in my hand. His mouth opened, but nothing came out at first. Then his voice cracked when he finally spoke. He asked why I would do this to them, why I would let them fall so far before telling them the truth. I pulled my phone back and looked at him calmly. I reminded him what he said at my promotion dinner, that I was just lucky, that I didn't work hard like real people. He flinched like I'd hit him across the face. His eyes squeezed shut for a second. When they opened again, he didn't argue. He knew I was right. He knew exactly what he'd said and how he'd said it. I told him about the trust fund I made up, how I created that whole story just to protect his pride, how I watched him brag to his church friends about being self-made while I paid his mortgage every month, how he told everyone his business was successful while I kept it alive with fake customer purchases. Dad started crying right there in my office lobby. This man who never showed weakness. This man who told me crying was for people who couldn't handle real life. Tears ran down his face and dripped off his chin onto his shirt. He realized his whole identity was built on my money. Every story he told, every time he acted like the successful one, all of it was me. Security took another step closer. I held up my hand and waved them off. They stopped but kept watching. Dad wiped his face with his sleeve, but more tears kept coming. He begged me to help them save the house. His voice broke on every other word. They were 5 months behind now. 3 weeks until foreclosure. Mom was having panic attacks so bad she couldn't sleep. Kelly's husband was threatening divorce. Tom was drinking every night on that blow-up mattress. I asked him if he remembered what he said when I told him the trust dissolved. He went quiet. I repeated his exact words back to him. Real workers don't rely on handouts. He closed his eyes and nodded. He understood I was throwing his own words in his face. His shoulders shook as he cried harder. I told him I'd think about it, but I needed time. I told him he needed to leave my office now because I had actual work to do. The kind of work he said I was just lucky to have. He stood up so slowly. He looked 10 years older than when he walked in 2 hours ago. His face was red and wet. His hands were still shaking. He asked if he could call me tomorrow. I said maybe. I watched him walk toward the glass doors. His shoulders were slumped in a way I'd never seen before. His whole body looked heavy. He pushed through the door and walked across the parking lot to his truck, the one with the cracked windshield he couldn't afford to fix. I stood there watching until he drove away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at my ceiling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Madison standing in that half-pinned tutu, while Kelly's credit cards got declined. I saw Mom on her knees scrubbing toilets for neighbors who used to drink wine at her house. The vindication I expected to feel wasn't there. Instead, this sick guilt churned in my stomach. It felt like I swallowed something rotten. I kept telling myself they did this to themselves. They treated me like I didn't deserve anything. They took my money while calling me lucky. But it didn't make me feel any better. I got up at 3 in the morning and sat on my couch in the dark. My phone sat on the coffee table. I knew they were all awake too, in that house 4 hours away, trying to figure out how to save it. Kelly called me the next morning at 7. Her voice was cold and hard. Dad told everyone the truth about where the money came from. She said I was cruel. She said I was vindictive. She said I was punishing Madison for Dad's mistakes. I reminded her that she maxed out 6 credit cards because I paid her minimums. That she spent money like she had infinite credit because I was always there catching her. She didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then she just hung up. The call ended with a click, and I sat there holding my phone. Mom called an hour later. Her voice was completely different from Kelly's. She wasn't angry. She was broken. She apologized for every time she bragged about charity work while I funded her lifestyle. For every dismissive comment about my career, for treating me like my success didn't matter. Her voice was so small, so defeated. I almost caved right there. I almost promised to fix everything and make it all go back to how it was. My finger hovered over my banking app. I could transfer money right now. Stop all of this. But I didn't. I told her I needed to think about what happens next. That I couldn't just go back to enabling them after they spent years treating me like I didn't earn anything. She said she understood. She said she was proud of me even though she never showed it properly. We both started crying on the phone. I could hear her trying to muffle the sound. After a few minutes, she said she had to go. She had houses to clean. The phone went quiet, and I sat there with tears on my face. Tom sent me a text message that night. It was long, really long. I scrolled through it twice. He wrote about how he took me for granted, how he assumed his life would always be easy because it always had been, how he never thought about where the money came from or why his rent was so cheap. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for help. He just said he was sorry. He said he was applying for jobs he used to think were beneath him. Jobs he told his friends he'd never do. It was the most mature thing I'd ever seen from my brother. The most honest. I saved the text message and read it 3 more times before I went to bed. That weekend, I opened my laptop and started searching for foreclosure timelines in their state. The process took 30 days minimum after the 5th missed payment. They were already at 5 months behind. I clicked through bankruptcy options next, reading about Chapter 7 versus Chapter 13, trying to understand which would destroy them less. My hands started shaking when I pulled up their mortgage balance from the old bank statements I'd saved. The total was $340,000 with $28,000 in missed payments and penalties. The numbers looked worse than I thought. Way worse. I spent 6 hours on Saturday reading legal documents and financial advice forums. People shared stories about losing their homes, about the sheriff showing up with eviction notices, about their kids watching furniture get moved to the curb. I kept thinking about Mom and Dad standing on the sidewalk with their stuff in boxes. By Sunday afternoon, I'd filled a notebook with calculations and timelines. If I did nothing, they'd get the foreclosure notice in 2 weeks. The sale would happen 60 days after that. I closed my laptop and sat there staring at my wall for an hour. Monday morning, I called a financial advisor who specialized in family crisis situations. Her name was on 3 different advice forums I'd read. She answered on the second ring, and I explained the whole situation in 10 minutes. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked how long I'd been enabling them. I said 6 years. She was quiet for a few seconds. Then she told me that resuming support without conditions would just recreate the same pattern. That real change requires real consequences. That my family needed to hit bottom before they could build something honest. I knew she was right, but my chest felt tight hearing it out loud. She said most people in my situation cave and go back to enabling because watching family suffer is brutal. But the ones who set real boundaries are the only ones whose families actually change. I thanked her and hung up. The call lasted 18 minutes. I sat at my desk the rest of the morning trying to focus on work and failing completely. Tuesday evening, my phone rang with Dad's number. I stared at it for 3 rings before answering. His voice sounded different, smaller. He asked if we could meet somewhere neutral to talk. Not at my office or their house. Just somewhere in between. I thought about saying no. I thought about hanging up. Instead, I heard myself agreeing to meet him at a coffee shop halfway between our cities on Saturday morning. He thanked me quietly. The call ended without the usual awkward small talk we used to force through. No asking about my job or the weather or anything else we pretended to care about. Just silence and then goodbye. I put my phone down and realized my hands were sweating. Wednesday afternoon, I got a Facebook message from Kelly. I saw the notification and almost didn't open it. But I clicked anyway. She apologized for her angry call. Said her husband gave her an ultimatum about the debt. Either she got it under control or he was done. She wrote that she was scared of losing her marriage. Then she admitted something I never expected. She said she knew the spending was out of control, that she knew it wasn't sustainable. But as long as the minimums got paid, she didn't have to face it. She could just keep swiping cards and pretending everything was fine. I read the message 3 times, then I typed back that I appreciated her honesty. That was all I could manage. She responded with a thank you and a heart emoji. It felt strange seeing that little heart after everything. I spent Thursday night drafting a document on my laptop. Conditions for any future financial help. I typed out the first requirement. Full transparency about their finances. No more hiding or lying about where money goes. Second requirement, Dad closes the failed business officially, files the paperwork and admits it's over. Third requirement, mandatory financial counseling for everyone: Mom, Dad, Kelly, Tom, all of them. Fourth requirement, no more lies about where money comes from. If I help, everyone knows it's me helping. No fake trust funds or mysterious benefactors. My hand stayed steady as I typed even though my heart was racing hard. I formatted it like a real contract with numbered sections and signature lines at the bottom. This was the boundary I should have set 6 years ago, before I'd given them $250,000, before I'd let them build their whole lives on my money while treating me like I didn't matter. Friday morning, I opened LinkedIn and saw a message request from Sydney Rocha, one of Dad's former employees. I clicked it expecting anger or blame. Instead, she wrote that she didn't blame me for what happened, that she and the other employees knew the business was failing for years, that Dad was lying about sales numbers and customer orders, that they'd all seen the writing on the wall but kept showing up because they needed the paychecks. Her message ended with 5 words that made something loosen in my chest. He needed this wake-up call. I read it twice. Then I messaged back thanking her for reaching out. She responded immediately saying Dad was a good guy who got lost in his own pride, that maybe losing everything would help him find his way back. I felt a tiny bit of the guilt lift off my shoulders. Not all of it, but enough that I could breathe a little easier. Saturday morning, I got to the coffee shop 40 minutes early. I ordered a black coffee and sat at a table by the window where I could see the parking lot. I watched cars pull in and out for 30 minutes. Then Dad's truck appeared. The windshield had a crack running from corner to corner that he clearly couldn't afford to fix. He parked and sat there for a minute before getting out. When he walked toward the entrance, I barely recognized him. He'd lost at least 15 pounds in 2 weeks. His jeans hung loose on his hips. His shirt looked 2 sizes too big. His face had new lines around his mouth and eyes. He spotted me through the window and his shoulders dropped even more. I pulled the conditions document out of my bag as he walked in. He got a coffee and sat down across from me without saying anything. I slid the document across the table between our cups. Dad picked up the papers and started reading. His jaw got tight when he hit the part about closing the business. He nodded when he read about the financial counseling. His hand shook slightly holding the pages. It took him 5 minutes to read all 3 pages. When he finished, he looked up at me. His eyes were red around the edges. He said it was fair. More than fair considering what they put me through. Then he pulled a pen from his shirt pocket. His signature came out shaky, but he pressed hard enough that I could see the indent through the page. He dated it and pushed it back across the table. I folded it and put it in my bag. The whole thing took maybe 2 minutes. No arguing. No negotiating. Just acceptance. I told him I'd pay the 3 most recent mortgage payments to stop the immediate foreclosure. That would be $8,400 to get them current enough to avoid the sheriff. But the 2 earlier missed payments were his responsibility to handle. He needed to figure those out himself. He nodded slowly and said Harvey might help with those if he explained everything honestly this time. I watched him swallow hard. Watched him accept that he had to ask his brother for help as an equal instead of as the successful one. That he had to admit he'd been lying for years about how well he was doing. His pride was dying right there across the coffee shop table, and I could see every second of it happening. He asked when I'd make the payment. I said today. He closed his eyes and breathed out slowly. We sat there for 2 hours talking about how the arrangement would work going forward. I'd provide a monthly budget that covered true necessities: mortgage, utilities, basic food, insurance. But they had to account for every dollar, send me receipts and bank statements. No more mystery spending or hidden purchases. Dad agreed without arguing. I told him he needed to close the business officially within 2 weeks, file the dissolution paperwork, and stop pretending it existed. He nodded and said he'd already started the process. Then I said he needed to find actual employment, even if it meant working for someone else, even if it meant taking a job that paid less than he thought he deserved. He looked down at his coffee cup and said he'd been applying places all week, that he had an interview Monday for a project manager position at a construction company. His voice got quiet when he said it was a real job with a real salary. Not playing businessman anymore. Just showing up and doing work someone else told him to do. I told him that was good. That honest work was better than fake success. He agreed, and his shoulders relaxed just a little bit. Everything about him looked different now. Smaller, but somehow more real. The fake confidence was gone. What was left looked tired and scared, but at least it was true. Dad stared down at his coffee cup for a long minute before speaking again. He said the hardest part of all this wasn't actually the money or losing the business. It was facing everyone he'd been lying to for years. His church friends who he told about his successful company. His brother who he competed with at every family gathering. The neighbors who watched him load tools into his truck every morning like he was running a real operation. They all knew now that he'd been faking it. That everything he built his identity on was just smoke and mirrors funded by his daughter's bank account. His voice cracked when he said it out loud. I told him that was the cost of pride. That maybe being honest would serve him better going forward than pretending to be something he wasn't. He nodded slowly and said he was learning that lesson the hard way. We sat there for another few minutes in silence. Then he asked if we could talk about one more thing before he drove home. I waited. He asked if I could forgive him. Not just for the money stuff, but for the promotion dinner comment. For all the years of dismissing my work and telling people I just got lucky. For making me feel like my success didn't matter because it came too easy. His eyes were wet when he asked. I told him honestly that I didn't know yet, and that forgiveness wasn't something I could just decide to give him right now. It would take time. He needed to show me through his actions that he really changed. Not just his words in a coffee shop when he was desperate. He nodded and said, that was fair. That he'd spend however long it took proving he respected me now. That he understood actions mattered more than apologies. We stood up and walked out to the parking lot together. He got in his truck and I watched him drive away, his taillights disappearing down the highway back toward home. I got back to my apartment around 2 in the afternoon, sat down at my desk and opened my laptop, pulled up my bank account and stared at the balance for a solid 5 minutes before doing anything. Then I initiated the transfer, $8,400 to their mortgage company. Watched the numbers change on my screen as the money left my account. Felt this weird mix of relief and anxiety in my chest. Relief because I was stopping the immediate crisis anxiety, because I was back to sending them money again. But this time was different. They knew where it came from. They knew the conditions. They knew it wasn't unlimited or unconditional anymore. The power dynamic had completely shifted. I wasn't the secret benefactor protecting Dad's pride anymore. I was the person holding them accountable. I saved the confirmation number and closed my laptop. Mom texted me that evening around 7. Said Dad came home and told her everything about our meeting. About signing the agreement. About the conditions, about the mortgage payment I made. She said she was ready to do the financial counseling and be fully transparent about everything. That she'd already started tracking every single expense in a notebook, even the small stuff like coffee and gas. She sent me a photo of the notebook page. Her handwriting was neat and careful. Each item listed with the exact amount. Grocery store, $47.23. Gas station, $31.50. Electric bill, $156.78. And I could tell she was trying hard to show me she was taking this seriously, that she understood this was her chance to prove she could change. I texted back that I appreciated her effort and that I'd set up the first counseling appointment for next week. Kelly called me 2 days later on Friday evening. Her voice sounded different from the angry call from before. Quieter. More careful. She asked if she could bring Madison to visit me next weekend. Said her daughter had been asking about me for weeks and didn't understand why the family was fighting. Madison kept asking when she could see Aunt again. I felt my chest tighten hearing that. I told Kelly yes, they could visit on Saturday. I agreed because punishing Madison was never my intention in any of this. She was just a kid caught in the middle of adult problems. And honestly, I missed my niece. Missed her silly stories and her enthusiasm about everything. Kelly's voice got thick with emotion when she thanked me. Said it meant a lot that I was willing to see them. That she knew she didn't deserve my help after maxing out those credit cards and living beyond her means for so long. I told her we'd talk more when she visited. The call ended and I felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for months. Tom sent me an email on Sunday with his resume attached. Asked if I had any advice since I worked in tech and he was applying for IT support positions. Said he'd been putting together applications all week but wasn't sure if his resume looked right. I opened the document and saw he'd actually put real effort into it. Listed his actual skills instead of inflating them. Included references from his last job before he lost the apartment I called him instead of emailing back. Spent an hour on the phone going through each section, explaining what hiring managers looked for, suggesting better ways to phrase his experience. He actually listened. Took notes. Asked thoughtful questions instead of just waiting for his turn to talk like he used to do. Asked me about certifications he should get, and whether he should apply to bigger companies or start smaller. It was the most substantial conversation we'd had in years. Maybe ever. When we hung up, I felt like I'd actually talked to my brother as a real person, instead of the image he usually tried to project. The first financial counseling session happened on Wednesday. Mom called me afterward around 8 at night. Her voice sounded exhausted, but also hopeful in a way I hadn't heard before. She said the counselor spent 2 hours going through everything with them, every credit card balance, every loan, every monthly expense, created this massive spreadsheet that showed exactly how much debt they had total. The number was bigger than they thought. Over $60,000 not counting the mortgage. The counselor made a realistic repayment plan that would take them 4 years minimum if they stuck to the budget. Mom said seeing it all laid out like that was terrifying, but also clarifying. Now they knew exactly what they were dealing with instead of just avoiding the statements and hoping it would somehow work out. She said Dad sat there the whole time without making excuses or trying to blame anyone, just took notes and asked questions about the plan. That was new. Saturday morning, Kelly and Madison showed up at my apartment around 10. Madison ran up and gave me a huge hug the second I opened the door. Started chattering immediately about her new hobby of drawing since she couldn't do dance anymore. Showed me pictures she'd drawn of flowers and animals and her family. Her enthusiasm was exactly the same even though everything else had changed. We spent the afternoon together, just hanging out and letting Madison talk about school and her friends and everything she'd been doing. Kelly stayed quiet mostly, watching us interact. Before they left, Kelly pulled me aside in the kitchen while Madison was in the bathroom. Thanked me quietly for the mortgage help. Said she and her husband were in couples counseling now, trying to work through the financial betrayal and broken trust. That he'd been furious when he found out about the maxed credit cards and how long she'd been hiding it. I could see the stress on her face, new lines around her eyes, but also a new determination. She said she was fighting for her marriage because she finally understood what she'd almost thrown away. They left around 4, and Madison hugged me goodbye 3 times before finally getting in the car. Dad started his new job on Monday morning. Texted me a photo around noon. Him in a hard hat and bright yellow safety vest, standing on what looked like a construction site. He looked tired but genuine, not performing for the camera. Just a regular guy in work clothes doing an actual job. The text just said, "Day 1, thank you." 3 words. No excuses or explanations or trying to make it sound better than it was. I saved the photo to my phone and stared at it for a while. This was my dad working for someone else, taking orders, doing project management for a construction company instead of pretending to run his own business. A position well below what he used to claim he did. And he was doing it without complaint because it was honest work that paid an honest wage. Harvey called me on Tuesday evening. Said Dad had come to him over the weekend and told him everything. The whole truth about the financial situation. About the fake trust fund that was actually me. About the business failing for years. About the debt and the foreclosure and all of it. Asked Harvey for help as a brother, not as a charity case or someone who had it all together. Harvey's voice sounded impressed when he told me this. Said he'd never seen his brother be that humble or that honest. That Dad actually admitted he needed help instead of pretending everything was fine like he'd done their entire adult lives. Harvey said he was helping with those 2 earlier mortgage payments. The ones I'd told Dad were his responsibility. But more than that, he was proud of Dad for finally facing reality. Then Harvey thanked me. Said I did what needed to be done even though it was hard. And that sometimes forcing someone to hit bottom was the only way to make them climb back up honestly. His words made me feel less guilty about the whole thing. Like maybe I hadn't been cruel. Just necessary. I set up the first video call with Mom and Dad on a Thursday evening. Both of us awkward and uncertain as their faces appeared on my laptop screen. Dad sat stiff in his chair, hands folded on the table in front of him like he was interrogated. Mom had her budget spreadsheet printed out, the pages covered in her careful handwriting, tracking every single purchase they'd made that month. She walked me through each line item, her voice quiet but steady as she showed me the $47 they spent on groceries, the $12 for gas, the $8.50 at the dollar store for cleaning supplies. Dad didn't say much, just nodded when I asked questions about his paycheck deposits and the mortgage payment they'd made on time. And I could see how uncomfortable he was having to answer to his daughter about money, having to prove he was being responsible with the budget I'd set. But he didn't complain or make excuses. He just sat there and let Mom do most of the talking while he looked at his hands. The most painful part was when Mom showed me a line item for $3.25 at a fast food place, then immediately explained that Dad had forgotten his lunch that day and needed to eat something. She'd tracked it down to the penny, even though it embarrassed them both. After the call ended, I sat staring at my blank laptop screen for a long time, thinking about how far they'd fallen and how hard they were trying to climb back up. Kelly posted on Facebook 2 weeks later about her new job at a retail store in the mall, the kind of place she used to walk past without even looking inside. The post was honest in a way Kelly had never been before, talking about learning humility and understanding what real work meant. She didn't try to make it sound glamorous or temporary. She just said she was working to pay down debt and provide for her family, and that she was grateful for the opportunity. Several of her friends commented with supportive messages, and I noticed something different about the whole thing. Kelly wasn't performing anymore. She wasn't trying to make her life look perfect or hide the hard parts. She was just being real about where she was and what she was doing. I screenshotted the post and saved it to my phone because it felt like proof that something fundamental had shifted in my sister. The woman who used to max out credit cards to maintain an image was now publicly working retail and calling it a blessing. That was growth I could actually see and believe in. Tom sent me a text message on a Saturday afternoon with 3 photos attached of his new studio apartment. The place was tiny, maybe 400 square feet total, with a small kitchen area and a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. But the photos showed his modest furniture arranged carefully. A small desk by the window where his laptop sat, a twin bed with clean sheets and a bookshelf he'd obviously assembled himself. The text said exactly what I'd hoped to see from him. He was proud of this small space because it was really his this time, paid for with money he'd actually earned at his new IT support job. I texted back telling him how proud I was, and he responded with a longer message about how different it felt to come home to a place he could actually afford. He said the pressure of pretending to have more than he did had been crushing him for years, and living honestly felt like he could finally breathe. I saved those photos too, right next to Kelly's Facebook post, building a collection of evidence that my family was actually changing. 3 months after the coffee shop meeting where Dad signed my conditions document, I reviewed their financial records and saw consistent progress for the first time. Every mortgage payment had been made on time without me having to remind them. Dad's paychecks from the construction company were modest but steady, deposited every 2 weeks like clockwork. Mom's cleaning business had grown from 3 clients to 7 through word of mouth, women who appreciated her attention to detail and honest pricing. Kelly had paid down $3,000 in credit card debt by working her retail job and cutting every unnecessary expense from her budget. The progress was slow and sometimes painful to watch, but it was genuine in a way their previous lifestyle never had been. They were building something real instead of maintaining a fake image, and I could see the difference in every line item of their budget spreadsheet. Dad had even started a small emergency fund, with $200 saved from his paychecks, money he set aside before spending anything else. It wasn't much, but it showed he was thinking ahead instead of just surviving day to day. Mom called me in early November and asked if I would come home for Thanksgiving, her voice nervous like she expected me to say no. It would be the first time I'd seen everyone together since that promotion dinner, where Dad called me lucky and I decided to stop enabling them. I felt anxious thinking about the dynamics, about sitting around the same table where everything had started, but I was also curious to see how they all interacted now that the lies were gone, and everyone knew the truth. Mom promised to cook all my favorite dishes, the ones she used to make before she got too busy performing charity work to actually spend time in the kitchen. Dad got on the phone and said he wanted to properly toast my promotion this time, to do it right after getting it so wrong before. I agreed to come even though my stomach twisted at the thought of facing them all together. Something had changed in my family, and I needed to see it with my own eyes to really believe it was lasting. Thanksgiving Day arrived cold and gray, and I drove the 4 hours back to my hometown with my hands tight on the steering wheel. Walking into my parents' house felt strange after months away, like stepping into a familiar place that had been rearranged while I was gone. Everyone was there already when I arrived. Kelly and her husband and Madison, Tom looking more put together than I'd seen him in years, Harvey and his wife who'd come to support the family. The first hour was awkward, with everyone making small talk and avoiding the real conversations we needed to have. We tiptoed around the elephant in the room, nobody wanting to be the first to acknowledge what had happened over the past year. Then dinner was ready, and we all sat down at the table, the same table where Dad had raised his champagne glass and called me lucky. Dad stood up with his water glass in his hand, and the room went completely silent. He looked at me directly and started talking, his voice shaking but determined. He acknowledged my hard work and my success, the things he should have celebrated at my promotion dinner instead of dismissing them. He apologized publicly to the whole family for his pride and his lies, for building a life on money that wasn't his while pretending to be self-made. Several people started crying, including Mom, who covered her face with her napkin. Kelly reached over and squeezed my hand. I felt tears running down my own face as Dad finished his toast, and everyone raised their glasses to me, really seeing me this time instead of looking past me to maintain their comfortable illusions. After dinner, Kelly and I ended up doing dishes together in the kitchen, while everyone else moved to the living room. She scrubbed plates and handed them to me to rinse, and we fell into an easy rhythm that reminded me of when we were kids. She started talking about her marriage counseling sessions, how she and her husband were learning to communicate about money instead of hiding spending and avoiding hard conversations. He was learning to be more involved in their finances instead of letting her handle everything in secret. She said losing my secret support had been the crisis her marriage needed to get honest, that they'd been living in denial about their debt and their spending for years. The counselor had helped them see that financial betrayal was just as serious as any other kind of betrayal in a relationship. Kelly's voice was different now when she talked about these things, more thoughtful and less defensive. She wasn't making excuses or trying to shift blame. She was taking responsibility for her part in creating the mess and working to fix it. I told her I was proud of her, and she stopped washing dishes to hug me with her wet, soapy hands. We stood there in the kitchen holding each other while water dripped on the floor, and it felt like I had my sister back for the first time in years. Tom and I took a walk after the dishes were done, bundling up in coats and heading out into the cold November evening. We walked through the neighborhood where we'd grown up, past houses that looked exactly the same as they had 20 years ago. Tom started talking without me having to ask, telling me how much happier he was now living within his means. He said the pressure of maintaining an image he couldn't afford had been exhausting, that he'd spent years pretending to be someone he wasn't just to avoid looking like a failure. Now he lived in a small studio and drove an old car and wore clothes from discount stores, and none of it bothered him anymore. He was dating someone new, a woman from his IT support job who knew exactly what his salary was and liked him anyway. She didn't expect expensive dinners or fancy gifts. She just wanted someone honest and hardworking, which was what Tom was becoming at age 35. I could see the change in him as we walked, the way he stood straighter and looked people in the eye instead of avoiding contact. He was finally becoming an actual adult instead of a 35-year-old child living on borrowed money and borrowed time. I told him I was proud of him too, and he smiled in a way that looked genuine instead of performed. Before I left to drive back to my city, Dad asked if we could talk privately in his office. Except it wasn't really his office anymore since Tom had moved out. It was just a regular room now with a desk and some filing cabinets. Dad pulled out a folder from one of the cabinets and showed me the official business closure paperwork, the legal documents that ended his failed company after almost a decade of pretending it was successful. He said it had been like putting down a suffering animal, sad but necessary because keeping it alive was just prolonging everyone's pain. The business had been dead for years, but he'd been too proud to admit it and let it go. Now it was officially over, and he could stop pretending to be a successful business owner and just be a regular guy with a regular job. Dad said he'd been sleeping better since the closure, that the weight of maintaining the lie had been crushing him without him even realizing it. He looked tired but peaceful in a way I'd never seen him before, like he'd finally stopped fighting against reality and accepted things as they were. Dad sat down at his desk and gestured for me to sit across from him, and we faced each other like we had in that coffee shop months ago. He told me he'd been going to therapy individually, working on his pride issues and his need for external validation with a counselor who specialized in men and ego problems. His therapist had helped him understand that dismissing my success at the promotion dinner was about his own deep insecurity, not about me at all. He'd felt threatened by my accomplishments because they highlighted his own failures, so he'd tried to minimize them to protect his fragile sense of self. Dad's voice was steady as he explained all this, like he'd practiced the words many times in therapy before saying them out loud to me. He asked if someday I might be able to fully forgive him for the years of dismissing my work and taking credit for success that wasn't his. I looked at my father sitting there in his regular room that used to be an office, this man who'd lost everything and was slowly building a real life from the ruins. I told him honestly that I was getting closer to forgiveness, that seeing him change and take responsibility was moving me in that direction I wasn't there yet, but I could see a path forward that I couldn't see before. Dad nodded and said that was more than he deserved, that he'd keep working to earn my respect and trust back however long it took. Mom caught me in the hallway as I was leaving, pulling me aside into the kitchen where the rest of the family couldn't hear us. She pressed a thick envelope into my hands and told me not to open it until I got home. The envelope felt heavy, and I could see her handwriting through the paper where it bulged. She squeezed my hand and said she'd been working on it for weeks, trying to get the words right. I drove the 4 hours back to my city with the envelope sitting on my passenger seat, not touching it even though I kept glancing over. When I finally got home and settled on my couch, I opened it carefully and pulled out 6 handwritten pages on the nice stationery Mom used to use for thank you notes to her charity gala donors. The first page started with an apology for a specific moment when I was 26 and told her about a project I'd led at work. She'd changed the subject to talk about the garden party she was planning. I didn't even remember that conversation, but she did, and she was sorry for dismissing my accomplishment like it didn't matter. Page 2 had 3 more specific memories like that, times she'd minimized my success or acted like my career was just something that happened to me instead of something I built. Page 3 talked about how she'd been performing charity work for status instead of actually helping anyone, and how cleaning houses had taught her what real work felt like. She wrote about scrubbing a toilet for a woman who used to come to her wine tastings, and how humbling it was to realize that woman had always worked harder than her. Pages 4 and 5 were promises about who she wanted to be going forward, a mother who celebrated her daughter properly, a woman who earned respect through actions instead of performing status. The last page just said she loved me and was proud of me, and that she hoped someday I could be proud of her too. I sat there on my couch crying while reading every word, tears dropping onto the nice stationery and smudging some of her careful handwriting. December came and brought the family's 6-month review with their financial counselor. Mom called me right after the meeting, her voice excited and proud in a way I hadn't heard in years. The counselor told them they'd exceeded every single goal she'd set, that most families in crisis don't make it past 3 months before falling back into old patterns. Mom said the counselor called them her success story, and actually asked if she could use their case as an example for other clients. Dad was there too, and I could hear him in the background saying they couldn't have done it without my tough love. Mom told me she was going to frame the progress report, and I laughed thinking she was joking, but 2 days later she sent me a photo. The framed report was hanging in the kitchen in the exact spot where she used to display photos from her charity galas, right above the table where they did their budget reviews. Now a week before Christmas, Kelly sent a video to the family group chat that made me actually gasp out loud. The video showed her sitting at her kitchen table with her first credit card, the one she'd maxed out at $8,000. Madison was standing next to her, bouncing with excitement like it was Christmas morning. Kelly looked at the camera and said she'd just made her final payment on this card, that it was completely paid off for the first time in 3 years. Then she pulled out scissors and cut the card into pieces while Madison cheered and clapped. Kelly picked up the pieces and showed them to the camera, then looked at Madison and explained that they were learning to live with what they have instead of pretending to have more. She told her daughter that having less money didn't make them less valuable or less happy. Madison nodded seriously and said she liked their new life better because mom wasn't stressed all the time. Kelly's voice cracked a little as she said this was a lesson she wished she'd learned before, but better late than never. The video ended with Madison giving Kelly a huge hug and both of them smiling at the camera. I watched it 3 times and saved it to my phone. January brought another promotion at work, my second major advancement in less than a year. This time I didn't plan a celebration dinner first. I called my family the same day I got the news, sitting in my office with the door closed. Dad answered and I told him about the promotion and the raise that came with it. His voice cracked immediately, and he said he was so proud of me, that I'd earned every bit of success I had. Then he asked quietly if he could come to the celebration dinner this time, if I was planning one. He said he wanted to do it right this time, to celebrate me properly the way he should have done before. I said yes and meant it, feeling something warm in my chest that I hadn't felt toward my dad in years. The second promotion dinner happened 2 weeks later at a nice restaurant downtown. Dad drove 4 hours to be there and showed up wearing his best shirt, the one he usually saved for church. My coworkers were there and my boss and some friends from outside work. When dessert came, Dad stood up and asked if he could say something. He gave a toast that made everyone at the table cry, including me and including him. Next, he talked about having a daughter who succeeded despite his failure to support her properly, who saved his family even when they didn't deserve it. He said I taught him that real strength isn't about protecting people from consequences. It's about holding them accountable because you love them enough to want them to grow. His voice shook the whole time and tears ran down his face. When he sat back down, he looked at me with genuine pride and respect in his eyes, not the fake pride he used to perform at church. I saw him as a real person for the first time instead of just my disappointing father. Mom's cleaning business kept growing through word of mouth from satisfied clients. By February, she had enough regular customers that she couldn't handle all the work herself. She hired an employee, a woman from her church who needed flexible hours. Mom called me so excited about running an actual profitable small business that made money instead of losing it. She said she finally understood what real work felt like, versus performing charity work for status. She was making less money than before when I was funding her lifestyle, but she told me she was sleeping better at night knowing she'd earned every dollar. Tom called me one evening in late February, his voice higher and faster than usual with excitement. His company had promoted him to a senior support position after just 6 months on the job. His boss told him he was impressed by Tom's work ethic and positive attitude, that he'd never seen someone learn the system so fast. Tom said it was his first real career advancement that he'd earned completely on his own, not because of connections or luck or secret help from his sister. I told him I was genuinely proud of him, and I meant it. I could hear the difference in his voice, the real confidence instead of the fake ego he used to carry. March brought Kelly's vow renewal ceremony in her backyard. She and her husband had decided to celebrate making it through the financial crisis together instead of letting it destroy their marriage. Madison was the flower girl, wearing a simple dress Kelly had sewn herself instead of buying. Kelly's vows included promising financial honesty and partnership, looking her husband in the eyes as she talked about learning to communicate about money instead of hiding spending. Then she turned to me standing in the small group of family and friends. She thanked me in her speech for loving her enough to let her fall and learn, for not catching her when she needed to hit bottom. Her voice broke, but she kept going, saying I was the strongest person she knew. Dad's construction company promoted him to senior project manager in early March after 8 months on the job. They recognized his actual skills once he stopped trying to prove he was more than he was. He called me from the job site, hard hat still on his head, to tell me the news. He said he was making decent money now, not wealthy, but stable and honest. The best part was that he told me he was happier in this job than he ever was running his fake successful business. He didn't have to lie anymore or pretend or keep track of what story he'd told to whom. He could just do good work and go home and sleep without anxiety crushing his chest. The family made their final payment to Harvey in mid-March. Officially clearing the debt from the mortgage crisis, Harvey called me first to tell me, his voice warm with pride for his brother. Then he invited the whole family to dinner at his house to celebrate. At the dinner, Harvey stood up and told Dad he was proud of how he'd handled the crisis once he stopped lying and accepted help. He said watching Dad transform over the past 9 months had been amazing. Dad teared up and thanked Harvey for not giving up on him, for lending money even when he had every right to refuse. The two brothers hugged for a long time, and I saw their relationship was stronger now than it had been in decades. It was built on honesty instead of competition, on mutual respect instead of Dad pretending to be the successful one. April came with warmer weather and a decision I'd been thinking about for weeks. I called Dad and told him I was reducing the monthly payment by 40% starting next month since they'd proven they could manage their money responsibly. He was quiet for a moment, then thanked me without arguing or trying to negotiate for more. He said he understood this was always the goal, independence instead of dependence on me forever. Mom got on the phone and told me they were ready to stand on their own feet for real this time, that the training wheels needed to come off eventually. Her voice was steady and confident in a way it hadn't been a year ago when everything collapsed. Kelly called me a few days later with news from her marriage counselor. They'd graduated from crisis counseling to maintenance mode after 10 months of weekly sessions. Kelly said the counselor told them they'd done the hard work of rebuilding trust and communication around money. She credited me with saving her marriage by forcing them to face their financial dysfunction, instead of letting it fester under the surface. 2 days later, a card arrived in my mail from Kelly's husband. Inside, he'd written that I did what he couldn't, made Kelly face reality when she wouldn't listen to him. He thanked me for caring enough about his wife to let her hit bottom and learn. I stuck the card on my fridge where I'd see it every morning. Tom asked me to meet him for coffee on a Saturday in late April. He showed up with a woman he introduced as Lynette Kaufman, Harvey's niece. I recognized her last name immediately and raised my eyebrows at Tom, who just grinned. Lynette was direct and funny, asking me questions about my tech work that showed she'd actually listened when Tom talked about me. Over the next hour, I watched how they interacted and could tell this relationship was different from Tom's previous girlfriends. She knew exactly what his salary was, had seen his modest apartment, and loved him for his character growth instead of any image he projected. They talked about moving in together next month and splitting all expenses equally down the middle. Tom looked genuinely happy in a way I'd never seen with his other relationships, the ones where he'd pretended to have more money than he did. I surprised the family in early May by inviting everyone on a vacation together, something we hadn't done in years. We rented a beach house for a week. Nothing fancy but comfortable and right on the water. The first morning, Madison ran straight into the waves while Kelly and her husband set up beach chairs. Tom and Lynette took a long walk down the shore holding hands. Dad and I ended up sitting on the deck with coffee, watching the ocean and actually talking about life and work like peers. He asked me about my projects at work with genuine interest, not the dismissive questions he used to ask. I told him about the promotion track I was on and the team I was building. He shared stories about his construction projects and the skills he was learning from the senior guys on his crew. We talked for 2 hours without any tension or competition, just a father and daughter having a real conversation. That night at dinner, Mom looked around the table at all of us laughing and told me this was the best family vacation we'd ever had, because nobody was pretending to be something they weren't. Madison's school called me in mid-May, asking if I'd come speak at their career day. Kelly had apparently told them I worked in tech, and they needed someone to talk to the 5th graders. I took a half day off work and drove to the elementary school. Madison's face lit up when I walked into her classroom. I spent an hour talking to 30 kids about working in technology, but mostly I talked about hard work and earning success through effort instead of luck or shortcuts. I told them about studying late into the night in college, about starting at the bottom of my company and working my way up, about the satisfaction of achieving something you actually earned afterward. Madison ran up and hugged me tight, telling me she wanted to be like me when she grew up. Across the classroom, I saw Kelly watching us with tears running down her face. She mouthed thank you to me, and I nodded back, understanding that we'd finally gotten to a place where she appreciated what I'd done instead of resenting it. June brought the family's final session with their financial counselor. She told them they were officially graduating from her program exactly 1 year after the crisis began. The counselor said they were in the top 5% of families who completely turn their finances around after hitting rock bottom. She'd worked with hundreds of families over her career, and most of them fell back into old patterns within months. Mom, Dad, Kelly, and Tom all credited me in that session with forcing the change they needed, but were too comfortable to make themselves. Dad told the counselor that his daughter had saved their family by withdrawing her support, that the kindest thing she ever did was let them fall and learn to stand back up on their own. The counselor gave me a hug when I showed up at the end of the session to celebrate with them. She said what I did took more courage than enabling them would have, that real love sometimes means watching people struggle through hard lessons. July came hot and sticky, and I made another call to Dad. I told him I was stopping the monthly support payments completely, because they were fully self-sufficient now. Dad's income from the construction company covered their modest mortgage payment. Mom's cleaning business provided extra money each month and was growing steadily. They had an actual emergency fund for the first time in their lives, 3 months of expenses sitting in a savings account. Dad called me back that evening, his voice full of genuine pride in their accomplishment. He said they'd made it, really made it without depending on me anymore. I could hear Mom cheering in the background. Tom texted me later that night saying he'd never seen Dad so proud of something the family achieved together. The weight I'd been carrying for 7 years finally lifted off my shoulders completely. Harvey called me a few days later and asked if we could meet for lunch, just the 2 of us. We sat at a diner near his office, and he told me privately that Dad was like a different person now. Humble and honest and actually pleasant to be around, Harvey said. He talked about how the whole family seemed lighter without the weight of maintaining false images for everyone. Harvey thanked me for doing what needed to be done even though it was hard, for not enabling his brother's pride and lies anymore. He said he'd watched Dad struggle his whole life with needing to be seen as successful, and losing everything finally freed him from that prison. We talked for an hour about family and change and second chances. Harvey picked up the check and hugged me in the parking lot, telling me he was proud to have me as a niece. The calendar flipped to the 1-year anniversary of my promotion dinner, the night Dad called me lucky and started this whole thing. Dad called and asked if he could take me to dinner, just the 2 of us. We met at a nice restaurant halfway between our cities. After we ordered, Dad pulled out a wrapped package and slid it across the table. Inside was a framed copy of my phone screenshot showing all the bank transfers, $247,000 total over 6 years. Below it was a plaque that read, "The investment that saved our family. We'll spend the rest of our lives earning your respect." I started crying right there in the restaurant, not caring that other diners were staring. Dad reached across and squeezed my hand, his eyes wet too. He said he'd had it made months ago, but waited for this specific date because it felt right to mark the anniversary of the night that changed everything. Over dinner, Dad told me that losing everything was the best thing that ever happened to him. It forced him to build a real life instead of a fake one, to find genuine happiness instead of performed success. He said he was truly happy now in ways he never was when he was pretending to be a successful businessman. No more anxiety about maintaining lies, no more stress about keeping up appearances, no more comparing himself to Harvey or anyone else. Just honest work, honest relationships, and honest satisfaction with a modest but real life. Then he looked me straight in the eyes and said he finally understood that I wasn't lucky. I was smart and hardworking, and I'd earned every single thing I had through effort and skill. He said he was sorry it took losing everything to see it. Sorry he'd spent years dismissing my success and attributing it to chance instead of merit. His voice cracked when he told me I was the strongest person he knew, and he was grateful every day that I was his daughter. I look across the table at him and realize I mean it when I say I forgive him. The man sitting here now isn't the same person who called me lucky at my promotion dinner. He respects what I've built, values honesty over appearances, and understands what real work actually means. Dad's eyes fill with tears, and he reaches across the table to squeeze my hand. His voice cracks when he tells me he'll never take my respect for granted again, that he'll spend the rest of his life proving he deserves it. I squeeze back and we sit there for a minute, just holding hands across the dinner plates while other customers probably wonder what's happening at our table. 3 months later, Mom starts something completely unexpected. She organizes a financial literacy workshop at the community center for other women who are struggling after depending on spouses or family members for money. She stands up in front of 20 women and tells her whole story, including the parts that make her look bad. She talks about cleaning toilets for neighbors who used to come to her wine tastings, about posting on Facebook begging for budget recipes, about the panic attacks when everything fell apart. The women listen and take notes, and several of them cry because they're living similar situations right now. Mom helps them create budgets, teaches them to read bank statements, shows them how to track spending. She's found real purpose instead of the fake charity work she used to perform for status. One woman tells her afterward that she saved her from making the same mistakes, and Mom comes home glowing with actual satisfaction. Kelly calls me on a Tuesday and asks if we can meet for coffee. We sit in a booth at the diner, and she tells me something that makes my throat tight. She's been teaching Madison about earning money through chores, about saving for things she wants, about the difference between needs and wants. Madison has a piggy bank now and counts her dollars every week, proud of what she's building herself. Kelly says she never wants her daughter to max out credit cards or depend on secret help like she did. Then Tom texts me the next week with a photo of a book called Teaching Kids About Money that he bought for when he and Lynette have children someday. He writes that the family dysfunction around money and pride stops with their generation, that they're breaking the cycle. I stare at that text for a long time, thinking about how that legacy feels more valuable than the $247,000 I spent keeping them afloat all those years. 2 years after that promotion dinner where Dad called me lucky, my family is actually healthy for the first time I can remember. We're all honest about our finances now, supportive without enabling, connected through real relationships instead of money and lies. Dad texts me every Sunday just to check in and ask how my week went. Mom sends me photos of recipes she's trying, asking for my opinion on dishes she's making for her workshop potlucks. Kelly and I talk on the phone about real things like her marriage and my career, not surface-level stuff about how perfect everything looks. Tom asks for career advice and actually uses it, sending me updates about projects at work and problems he's solving. I spent $247,000 in 6 years enabling their dysfunction, propping up their fake lives and protecting Dad's pride. But the year I stopped, the year I let them fall and struggle and face consequences, that was the year I actually saved them. They're standing on their own feet now, proud of what they've built honestly through real work. I'm proud of them too, proud of who they became when they had to become real people instead of performing success. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people fall far enough that they learn how to stand back up themselves, even when watching them fall breaks your heart.